Morning, everybody, and welcome to the 19th in our series of Anatomy of the Crisis events. We've been doing them every single week since the beginning of the crisis, and we've been inviting leaders from the HR function throughout to discuss their experience from the very early days to now, where we are coming out. And today I'd like to thank you all for attending, and it's great to see so many people coming and joining us today. Thank you for taking time out of your day. And I'd like to welcome Sheridan Whalley from the Department for Education, who is going to be joining us today to talk about her experience through the crisis and actually, really excitingly, how she maintained a very significant program. So to start off, Sheridan, welcome. Thank you for joining us. And could you tell us a little bit about your role and DFE's role so we can understand how that fits within the governmental picture?
Yeah, certainly. So I work for the Department for Education, which is a ministerial department. Department for Education is responsible for schools, education, children's services, higher and further education, policy, apprenticeships and the wider skills across England. We currently employ just over 7,000 staff. So we've seen quite an increase over recent years. My role, I'm a Deputy Director in HR, and I currently oversee pay strategy, pay policy, payroll. I oversee and lead on the strategic workforce planning for the department and the resourcing strategy and employee policy and relations, and most activities related to our internal senior civil servants within the Department for Education.
So I imagine during the crisis quite a lot of support required from your area, Sheridan. So that sounds very much that you would be the joining point of a lot of queries and concerns during the earlier parts of the crisis.
Indeed, yes, certainly, as you know, HR policies were emerging in response to the world events, having to be dynamic and responsive to, we work in an environment where we have colleagues in the centre that develop our HR policies and guidance, and we have to reflect those internally, and that was, daily we were seeing updates and having to respond quite dynamically to a really changing landscape, as was everyone.
For many of us, we think about the big ministerial departments being in their ministries in Whitehall and everybody working there, and therefore, and on, it's often technology which might not be that mobile, etc., but really kind of primarily desk-based activity in a single central London location. Is that the way DFE works these days, or am I thinking back to 20, 30 years ago?
Yeah, no, it's definitely a modern workplace. I mean, we were able to go overnight thanks to a fantastic tech directorate in the department, overnight to 7,500 staff being able to work effectively from home due to the IT equipment and kit that we have. It's a fairly distributed organisation anyway. We have offices around England, so not all of our workforce is based in London. It's around 35% in London, 65% outside. And as I say, everybody had the necessary kit to be able to get going straight away over the course of the weeks. Things like additional equipment for those that weren't used to working from home on a more long-term basis was available, but generally everybody was able to get going fairly quickly.
So operationally, actually, thankfully, because of those changes which have recently been made, you were able to get everyone working pretty quickly. So operationally, although presumably communications, talking to people, new ways of doing that, but the actual tools were available to people. And I understand that you've got, is it 12 offices which you have regionally?
Yes, we do, yeah.
And how does that split up? So is it kind of 2 or 3 big centres or many big centres?
It's fairly evenly distributed. I mean, we've got some larger offices, Coventry and Sheffield, for example, and Manchester, and then some smaller hubs, for example, in Bristol.
And your HR and payroll team itself, are they centred across those areas, or are they focused on one or other of those locations?
The payroll team, when we established it, we decided to locate them all in one place, and that's Coventry.
Right. So, a substantial government department with partly devolved activities already across the country, etc., with technology which needed to, with technology which allowed them to work remotely. So that's a great story. But my understanding, and actually what I think I want to focus on quite a lot today, is I understand that during the crisis, you were partway through a project and program of change. And actually, well, what happened, Sheridan? Did that stop immediately, or did something else happen? What was that program of change, and
Yeah.
and what was the decision points around it to that point?
Yeah, so I mean, early 2019, the department did quite a significant review of its corporate services and its systems, and a decision was taken to insource a lot of our corporate services. That included HR services, and so alongside that, we had to bring in a new HR, payroll and expenses system. So that really started in earnest around February 2019. We were on target to go live in May of this year. That might seem quite a long period of time, but configuring and designing a HR and payroll system with the extent of our policies and systems as a ministerial department and part of the civil service was very complex. We've hit quite a few significant challenges along the way that we've had to think really hard about how we get solutions to. And then COVID hit us and the rest of the world in March. And so our only decision point really at the end of March was we recognised we had a lot to do still, but we still wanted to do it. We'd come so far and had overcome so many challenges. We had a team in place, all ready to go, all desperate to run their payroll. And so the only pause we did was move go live from May to June. And that was in part due to ensuring that we brought in some additional resource as a contingency in the payroll team. We didn't know if any of our staff would become ill, either within the payroll team or the wider project team, which actually was across the departments, not just in HR, given its integrations with systems into finance, etc. So yeah, we looked at a contingency of resource and took a decision to bring in some additional agency workers to support in the event we needed it, and just move the go live date to June from May.
I have to say, at the time, that must have been a fairly punchy decision. There must have been voices there going, "Hang on, this surely can't be possible. You've got all these other changes occurring, etc. How can you maintain that program?" And there must have been other voices going, "Phew, we can get an extra 6 months to, if we play our cards right and blame it kind of on COVID to delay it." So it must have taken strong stakeholders to keep that on the road and take what some people would call quite a brave decision at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it sounds on reflection quite a brave and bold decision, but actually in the midst of it, because so many people had invested so much time up to that point, I suppose the idea of waiting an additional 6 months to go live felt worse than actually, everybody was chomping at the bit to run a payroll and go live, and were felt very, very ready to do that. So you're right, there were people were asking the right questions and posing the right challenges around, is it sensible to continue to do this? Should we wait another 6 months? What if 50% of our workforce went sick? How would that impact things? But on balance, we felt the right decision was to continue with June and identify some additional resource to support the team if we felt it was necessary.
Must have also created directly practical challenges as well, because although in theory, payroll teams can work and do their payroll parallel runs and do their reconciliations and do all that kind of program work as well as their day-to-day work from a remote point of view. There must have been some consideration at times during that kind of program. You do need to bring that team together. So how did you do that, Sheridan? Because frankly, that's the thing which would worry me most, not the will and the desire to do so, but actually the practicality of doing it.
Yeah, so I mean, we had a day by day, almost hour by hour plan. So we were able to easily pinpoint what was the right point that we would need to actually have staff on site in the payroll team. As you say, I mean, ordinarily payroll teams would come together and work together. They certainly would need to be on the first payroll of the scale, complexity, and issues that we were aware of. So as a consequence of, I think, some quite good planning, we knew from middle of May we would have to have the payroll team on site. That would need to be half the team to begin with, and then that would need to be increased to the full team, plus the additional resource from around the end of May throughout June, as the payroll was validated, and we did all of the data entry and then reconciled it before pressing the big button. So it was really important that the team were on site together. The team was very new as well. They hadn't actually run a payroll together. That's very difficult to do remotely if people have questions about peculiar issues that are emerging in a payroll. They need to be able to ask in the moment rather than waiting for calls to do that.
So what location did you pick, and how did you make it ready for, because presumably most people are working from home at this point. You saw this need to bring that entire team in place. So where did you pick, and what measures did you take to make it feasible to bring those guys in?
Yeah, so it was Coventry, because that's where the team were located. There was one member of staff that couldn't come into the office, who was shielding, but the rest were able and willing to come into the office, because that was, as important as anything else.
Yes, you can't force people to do this in that situation, yes.
No, so they're all very, very willing. We work with Government Property Agency and our own estates team in the department to make sure the facilities and arrangements were in place within all of the guidelines. That resulted in the team going from working in quite a small discrete area in the building to sitting 2 meters apart across various banks, which, the first time you walk in and see the team sitting in such a dispersed way is and shouting across banks to each other, it was, I have to say, quite amusing. But teams around us made it work. They understood the urgency and the need to do it, and made the offices safe for staff to come in and work.
Well, that's so unusual. That's not how payroll works. You all sit in a huddle in one corner.
I know. And because they didn't want to shout, I'd walk in and they were all putting their hands up to ask questions, which was, it just actually demonstrated why it was important they were in the office together rather than having to phone each other if they had queries. It was, they were able to progress the payroll to the standard and quality assurances that they wanted and had planned to do, because they were all in the same place and were able to overcome some of the questions they had really quickly.
It's a really interesting model, actually, when I think about it, which is that when there's a discrete period of work, and a lot of our commentators are describing this, a lot of HRDs, when there's a discrete piece of work, there is now, which needs people to come together, there is now more space in our offices to allow people to do that exercise. And as long as it's not an ongoing thing which goes on all the time, then actually it works really well, because you can open the offices for a particular set of activities. You can pull that team together. They can be assured that they can work safely, etc., and also know that they're not going to be swamped with all. It doesn't look like the old office, but then actually get some really focused work done. And I think that's a very interesting model, possibly for the future, which is less for many organizations of everybody coming together on a daily basis, and more for those organizations to provide and use their space in a different way to provide kind of focused activities when necessary. And I don't know about you, Sheridan, but I'm finding that area quite exciting for project-based work in particular, that's a possibility moving forward.
Yeah, and it's certainly, for focused activities, I think the mindset is almost different as well. If you're going into the office for a very discrete purpose, as opposed to going into the office to work for the day as you would every day, feels quite different as well.
Yes, providing a good reason to go in, I think, is the critical thing. There's a business need. I imagine also in Coventry that the location allowed things like car travel and stuff like that, which is,
Indeed.
I guess, quite different from if the team had been based in central London.
Indeed, yeah. Everybody was able to drive in, and we offered alternatives to staff that didn't have that option as well. So everybody that could, and that we needed to come in, other than the shielding staff, were all able to get in and work, which has been really great. Really great.
Great. So back in February, you took this brave decision. You decided we're not going to delay our programme, cancel our programme, but instead do what is the most intensive activity for a payroll team during the middle of COVID, whilst they're all busy on other stuff. Then go through a period of payroll parallel runs and all that, and try and get a new solution live for 7,000 people. So quite an agenda. How did it go, Sheridan? Well, are you going to tell us it was the wrong decision and a bit of a crisis, or was it okay? What happened?
It was okay. It was okay. So April, May, and June. It is fair to say the teams, not just in payroll, but in our data team, our HR data team, and our reward team. There's obviously a team that was supporting the configuration of the system. So all people across HR and more widely in our corporate services teams. April, May and June was very, very intense, because we were going through a period of receiving all of the data from the current and the previous payroll provider. We were having to check that, validate it, load it into the system, validate it again. And that process has been quite helpful, because along that way we've identified some issues that we need to put right for the future as well with our information. So that's quite helpful.
Yeah.
But really intense. We then went into a period in late May, early June of reconciling all of our data to our previous payroll provider, and then inputting 3 months worth of cutover data, because obviously staff hadn't been able to process many pay activities and transactions, because one system's closing, one's opening. So you're not just running a current payroll, you've also got up to 3 months worth of catch up to input as well. And the team had a very clear plan that they would reconcile back to May's payroll to within £1 variance. So they did that, and we ran June's payroll, and we had no payroll errors on our first payroll run, which is just amazing, and it's testament to a team that really wanted to do this well.
It's quite interesting, isn't it? Because I typically they talk about that kind of transition tripling the work of the team. You've got the old payroll to run to maintain on a normal basis. You've got a reconciliation exercise to your payroll parallel run to prove that the new system works in the same way, and you've got the accumulated changes which are sitting there. So you might say 3 times the work, but I wonder whether the number of changes occurring was lesser because of the less business activity of hiring and reorganizing and stuff like that during COVID. So that possibly, perversely, it may have been a very good time to pick to do that kind of exercise. Was change kind of reduced because of the crisis, do you think? And do you think that helped, or is that not a factor in this?
I think the team would say they still felt it was a fairly high level of activity that was required to catch up. I think, recruitment carried on. We went into lockdown, 23rd of March. It takes 40 odd days to recruit. So you would have already started recruitment processes underway at the point of lockdown. So you would have had new starters coming through throughout that period. So people were still joining, people were still leaving. We had lots of activities that impact pay, such as overtime, people having to move to new roles in response to COVID, and our departmental response. So there was quite a lot of transactional activity that, in a crisis you'd actually expect there to be. So all of that had to be caught up, and we were moving into a system where all of the organisational hierarchies were being loaded in. So if there'd been significant changes there, things like that had to be changed as well. So quite a lot of transactional activity continued and had to be captured in that first payroll for the and also for the opening up of self-service. So the system was being opened up to staff towards the end of June. So it was important, when we at the point at which we opened the system to self-service, staff recognised their own staff records, they were correct, the hierarchies were correct. So yeah, quite a lot of cutover and transactional activity throughout that period.
So what do you, it is not universally true that transitions of large ministerial departments onto new payrolls is a smooth exercise. It sounds like yours has been relatively smooth, in fact, very smooth. What would you ascribe that success to, Sheridan? Because, I think a lot of our listeners, etc., we've all been through payroll parallel runs and transitions of payroll systems, which have proved quite difficult, and then involved quite a lot of work afterwards to try and pick up the pieces, and really incredibly stressful on occasions. So it seems like that hasn't been your experience. What are your thoughts? What would you ascribe that success to? Why is it that this one has been relatively smooth? Is it, yes, yeah? What are your thoughts in that area?
Yeah, so I mean, it's gone smooth in June and July's payroll, but there are certain aspects of the system that have not gone live that we have manual workarounds for at this moment in time. We've got some fairly significant interface with our pension provider activity to finalise. That has been really technical and very complex to get right. Throughout this period, we had a big decision point towards the back end of 2019 to the system we bought. We were unable to configure to our pay and sick pay policies and our absence policies. And so we had to take quite a big decision, slap bang in the middle of this programme, to take our sick pay offline and do it in a very different way. So there's been some fairly complex and difficult problems to solve to get us into a position where we were able to run the payroll. But I think the fact that, the knowledge base around this is a big group of people from within HR, payroll and finance and our corporate services portfolio that have got a huge amount of technical knowledge, knew what they were expecting to see in the system, but were able to come up with some fairly inventive and creative solutions to challenges we couldn't get in place and sorted for day one.
Yes, yeah, I mean, that's interesting in itself. So you're saying that by basically sidestepping things which otherwise, if you'd taken so 80% of the solution, 90% of the solution is there. For the 10%, you were able to compromise and generate a compromise, which would be temporary workarounds for later. I mean, that, I've watched grand designs doing this kind of stuff. That's exactly how to do it. Don't ask for the extra bedrooms and extra fancy finishing halfway through the program. So, but that's often hard to do in government, to get that decision making, because quite a few people, well, if we don't have our interface, my CSP or whatever it is, if we don't have this piece, etc., then they'll almost die in a ditch over that. So you must have had good governance on the program to be able to agree those compromises in those areas which were, put out of scope and back in scope, etc.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, there was a really effective governance programme at the centre of all of the corporate services changes. So at the same time as we were doing this, finance were changing their systems as well. So there's been a very strong and robust governance central programme. I think on the HR and payroll systems, you get a sense, don't you? You're 9 months into the programme and you still haven't seen the progress you need to have to be able to run that configuration in the system effectively. You haven't got another 9 months to get it right. So you've got to take a decision at that point to find an alternative until we can get it right. And
yes,
that takes some, discussion, debate with not just our colleagues within the department, but within the the system provider, because their system doesn't work like that. So we've got to convince them that's the way we need it to work for us to be able to stand up the system and pay people. But everybody bought into it, and it that took a lot of persuading at times. But yeah, no, it is about just taking that call to say there's no point carrying on with this. We're not going to get it where we need it to be by the time we want to go live.
That's very interesting. And Stanley, what was the system which you were moving from and to?
We were moving from SOP that was provided by SSCL to us, and we've moved to Workday.
Right. So that's a very good story for Workday in government, actually, because yes, I think that may be the first or second payroll sitting on Workday in government, and that's a really good story that it's been such a careful or such an effective transition.
Yeah, indeed.
Good. Could you tell us a bit more? So moving forward, you've now got you've continued with this program throughout the COVID crisis. You've achieved, I would say, a notable success. Actually, going live during that period, particularly for a government department of your size, is quite a significant achievement. What's next? So, what's going on in the next few months in your view, both on the program and outside that, Sheridan?
Yeah, so on the programme, we've still got, stuff to sort. So we've got the interface with the pension provider, my CSP, which we are confident that we will be able to deploy operationally towards the end of September, which will be, quite a significant milestone to have overcome.
Yes.
We will have our first pay award, hopefully, to make in September in our own payroll system. So that's a good thing to be doing. We've also got, a day 1 to 365 plan with the Workday system. So I talked about some of our policies and our sick pay not being done online because we can't get the system configured in that way. So we've got quite a big project to stand up throughout the next few months with Workday to find a way and solutions that the system can be configured so that we can process the sick pay with our policies, which are, they're not standard, they're quite complex. And then there's other modules that we think will add huge benefit to bringing in and standing up within the Workday system. So skills, professions, capability, all of those additional modules in a HR system that add the value other than just the transactional activities. So that day 1 to 365 plan has got going and quite a lot of activity within that. And then, from a broader HR perspective, as the months, as we move through the next few months, what does our next iteration of our strategic workforce plan look like? What does our workforce, where's it going to be located? What's the right policies and approach to where our workforce work from should be in the next few years as a consequence of what we've learned over the last few months. And so we'll probably start to look at that towards the end of this year.
Great. And so now that's been quite a long slog. So if we go back to the beginning of the program and then the decision, and also this the COVID crisis in the middle, etc., those guys have been working on this program for quite a time. How are you keeping morale and enthusiasm up, and how is that going? Because after a while, Sheridan, I'm fascinated with your story, and I know our viewers are, but some of those team members must be going, oh, please, can we move back on to? So how's that going, and how are you maintaining that enthusiasm and energy, actually?
Yeah, and it has actually, that's a really good point. It has required a huge amount of energy and resilience, because I mustn't forget, it's been a huge program for us without COVID-19. With it, a lot of my colleagues have had families around them where they wouldn't normally have responsibility for their children, while they're also leading some fairly difficult conversations and meetings, and they have done it really, really well. So resilience has been great amongst the team, but we're all taking holiday now, so we've all got to a point where we feel we're going into our month 3 of running the payroll, so we're all moving into just taking a bit of time off now. So the team over the last few weeks and the coming weeks are all taking a few weeks off just to re-energize themselves. As a HR directorate, we're moving into a more business as usual operating model, and so we'll be thinking in the coming months what's our normal job look like, and what stuff have we still got that wouldn't ordinarily be in that day job, and where should it be, and just moving that around into the right place. And that's probably going to take a month or so to do that.
I see. So you're calling a bit of a reflective period for people to energize now, because knowing that we are much of the way through this crisis, I suspect, but I think we're all preparing for more surprises and more changes to occur. And so you're saying, whilst it's possible, take a bit of a reflective period, take holiday off, etc., and then prepare for the autumn when kind of there's more project work to be done, etc. But who knows what other things are going to occur during that period.
Absolutely, yeah, definitely. And actually, staff just need to take themselves out of this environment, even though they may not be going away. They just need to rest a little bit, because there's been a lot of discretionary effort over the last 3 months that has been required, more than you'd ever expect, and people have just done it willingly, and they just need some downtime.
And I suspect that we all are aware of this, that it's not simply that our work's been demanding during this period, but also outside of that, there's been a burden of concern, about family members, about everything else, which must take a toll on people's energy in the end, I think. So that's a really interesting tip, actually, I think, which is to try and all of us to try and generate that period, grab a period when we can, when things are relatively normal, because it's going to kick off again in some way or other, as
Yeah.
when we come back in October. Maybe not the illness itself, but the, things will be different. Throughout this period, what we've seen is everyone's had to be incredibly reactive to changes which are occurring on a daily and weekly basis. And I think that we would be unwise to assume that there won't be future changes as we go forward.
Indeed.
Good. Any long-term surprises, benefits, things which you've seen through the crisis and through your recent experience, which you think is going to be long-term, and actually, positives, if there are such things, out of the last 6 months?
Do you know, I suppose the single biggest positive would be what we're doing now, having a conversation or a meeting over a video camera without feeling the need to be in an office. And that has, almost brought about a level playing field for those, if everybody's on a meeting virtually, that feels okay for everybody and they're all in the same place. And that's quite good. Meetings, where you've got lots of people in an office or and a few on a video, very often the balance of the conversation isn't quite right. And so that has really helped people get balances to meetings better because everybody's virtual.
I think there's a really interesting drive around inclusion and regional inclusion as well. So many of the HRDs I've been talking to were in positions where much decision making was taken at their central location, etc. And then when I speak to people, I might go out to a regional office, etc., and they go, "Oh, well, I never go to those meetings because I'm never in wherever the location is, Coventry, London, whatever it is." And I am hearing, and I think that it's really true, that actually the ability to include people from all regions in decision and other meetings is far easier now we've got used to this technology. So when we have our HR strategy meeting, we're able to invite people from regions and they'll come. Whereas previously, when it was a face-to-face meeting, often certain people would be excluded, or it wasn't quite worth the trip to make that. And I think that's really exciting, because I think in an organization which has devolved such as yours, actually inclusivity is really important, and this tool is a great leveler for that. And I think that therefore, taking greater advantage of the skills we've got in different regions and stuff like that is possibly a really lasting impact of the changes over the last few months.
Yeah, indeed. And I think people have talked more. So because there's no expectation to travel or be in an office, I've seen teams across the department hold more regular divisional meetings. I'll probably do that myself, where all the division gets together every week, and that's brought about quite an improved connection and communication method and routes that we probably hadn't taken advantage of previously.
Yes,
that's been really good.
And that is one of the long-term agendas of central government, to push that greater devolution, to push that greater use of the regions, etc. And I think that if the changes we've made have accelerated us in the right tools and ability to do that, that's a very exciting change. It's this is a long-term strategy for government, and it's been hard. And so I think that is really exciting. And when I speak to people like Rupert McNeil, etc., they're talking about that drive to be able to make that regionalisation more functional. And I think that's a really exciting. I wouldn't like to be those are my words, but I think that's a very exciting possibility. Now, Zoe, have we got any questions today? What questions have you got for Sheridan and myself?
Yes, so we have a couple here. So going back to when you were talking about your project, Sheridan, were there any senior stakeholders who wanted to delay or cancel the project and how did you gain their buy-in?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I'm not sure I would say that anybody wanted to pause or delay it, but they were asking the right questions about should we, given everything that's going on, given the risk of our workforce potentially being impacted, should we be considering pausing and delaying the programme for 6 months? So I think the right questions were asked, but I can genuinely say I don't feel there were any senior stakeholders that were pushing hard or expecting us to delay for 6 months. They were simply asking the right questions that you'd be expecting them to ask.
Interesting, and unusual for some boards we work with are often more cautious than that. So that's a very interesting and confident governance you must have had there, Sheridan.
Yeah, and I kind of think, we'd actually done the parallel payroll testing before we went into lockdown, and we'd had exceptional results from that. So there was a high level of confidence in the team's ability to be able to process pay through the payroll system, even though, and notwithstanding what I talked about earlier, the amount of data that had to be loaded, validated and reconciled and everything input. But the team had demonstrated we can use this system and we can run a payroll in it, and we're getting good outcomes from the parallel payrolls.
Right, so you kind of reached that tipping point of confidence at just the right moment.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, if that had been a month later, it could have been a completely different story. But actually, by getting to that point where the board and the steering group were getting to a point of confidence, really made it possible for them to take a positive decision. Interesting. What else have we got, Zoe?
So two points for Sheridan. If you were going to do it again, what would you do differently? And the second question is similar. So what's your one tip for a company that might be looking to replace their HR and payroll systems?
With the thought of doing it again right now? So what would I do differently? I think the one thing that we have learned, so just from a HR team, and one of the reflections we've made is that, the language between when you're configuring a HR and payroll system, the language we use and our definitions make sense to us, but they won't make the same sense to either the system or our delivery and implementation partners who were configuring the system for us. And if you're not always talking the same language and always have the right interpretation, there's system configurations we're expecting but aren't delivered. But nobody's wrong in that situation. It's just the way we've described it or it's been interpreted. And I think that's where we may have lost some time or been the most frustrated. So, in our reflections, and I think it's something we will learn for the day 1 to 365 plan, because we've got lots more configuration to do. We need to approach the scope of any configuration differently and make sure our ask is really, really clear and much better defined than perhaps we'd done previously.
So that's half the question. The other half of the question, Sheridan, if I might remind you, was what tips would you provide to others who are going through that or considering that kind of exercise?
So that would be one. Think about the scope that you're defining. I think most of the people listening to this won't need to hear this. Having the right technical expertise on payroll or your HR policy is really, really crucial to getting a product that's going to reflect your pay and HR policies, that when you launch for a self-service perspective. You know, a manager goes in and sees the absence policy and systems they are expecting. So the technical expertise that I had the privilege to work alongside and with in this project has meant, I think, that we've got a system pretty much what we would have needed and expected. So technical expertise, the right payroll team brought in at the right time. We started recruiting our payroll team last March, and you know, identified the size of team we thought we needed at that point, and spent the next 9 months recruiting a really strong payroll team. And they have, you know, they've been magnificent. So those would probably be my the things that I reflect back and think, actually, without those ingredients, things wouldn't have gone so well.
Great. Thank you, Sheridan. That was a really fantastic and very positive conversation. I was excited about talking to you today because of this really interesting story of continuing a project and program, actually successfully, but doing that through the COVID crisis. And I think that is a really exciting and positive view. I wish you best of luck with the improvements you're making in the autumn, and I hope that you and the team will get a chance to actually take some downtime, etc. But thank you very much for joining us today. That was really, really good. And thank you everybody else for joining. We're going to be continuing the series of Anatomy of the Crisis, but moving forward into the new future over the next few weeks. What we're looking at is aspects of how people got through the crisis and what they did during the crisis, and then also additionally conversations about the relaunch and what that's going to look like and what the new future of work is going to look like. And we'll be doing that increasingly as we meet more and more stakeholders and some of the old stakeholders we've spoken to. So please bear with us, because I think there is more to this story as we go forward, and I think it's going to be really exciting continuing this opportunity to share knowledge and information from HR leaders, etc., across the community. So thank you very much, Sheridan. Thank you everybody else for joining.
Thank you.
Bye.